So this is the start of the recording with Professor Daniel Kelly from Cardiff University, who's done research into whistleblowing. Is that right, Danny?
That's right, yes. I've been involved in that stream of work since, well, probably the last 6 or 7 years, really, in different kinds of work, which I'm happy to talk about today.
Yeah. Okay, so I was going to kick us off with asking you what you would advise a student who came to you as a senior nurse colleague saying, look, I've seen this practice in my area. I don't think it's safe. What should I do about it?
The first thing I would say is that everybody involved in the situation has a part to play. So whistleblowing is not just down to, I would say whistleblowing is the last resort. So to blow the whistle on something is really, there's no other options available. So that would be my first response. If a student was in a situation that they weren't sure about what they were seeing, then there should be a policy in place from the university, or certainly in that clinical area, that they can refer to. Nobody should feel that there's nothing, they don't know what to do. There's always things to do. It's just deciding, I would say, the best thing to do, because to suddenly step up and blow the whistle, if you like, it's quite a dramatic step. Mm-hmm. And some people have had to do that inevitably, and we've all seen high-profile cases that have happened. But I would say most students would see things that perhaps they're not sure about, and the best option is to talk about it, to get it out in the open, and just to say, is this normal? Is what I'm seeing normal? And if they're still not sure, is to talk to someone about it, maybe their link lecturer or their personal tutor. And if that's still not quite right, you can take advice from the RCN or professional organisations. But really, there's normally processes that you can follow to help you to decide the best route for your own sense of satisfaction in that situation.
Yeah. Well, it's a good way of looking at it, because I think my reaction as a tutor in the past has been, oh, I've got this awful responsibility. What am I going to tell them to do? And actually what you're saying, it's important to think about what you've seen before you do anything. And yeah.
Yeah, I would say talk about it, and talk about it with your colleagues. I mean, you're quite vulnerable as a student, and you're going into these new areas, and sometimes they're very busy, and you're kind of thinking, oh, I'm not sure what I've got to offer here. And so you are quite vulnerable, and that feeling of vulnerability makes people, I think, sometimes not question things that in everyday life they would think, why on earth are they doing this? Or why are they talking to people like this? Or how can this be acceptable? And we've got some examples from some of the work that we've done that illustrate that. But the main thing is to speak about it. And as a student, to feel, you're learning to find your voice.
Yes.
And so concerns about practice or management or just the way care has been organised is part of that voice that you're trying to find.
Yeah, I think that's a good way of looking at it, because as a qualified nurse, the student has got to begin to have voice. And it's a process, isn't it? And you grow in confidence as you develop your voice. So I wondered whether I could ask you to talk very briefly about the key research you've done in the area, and maybe the learning that you've had from researching in this area.
Okay, well, there's probably two projects I would talk about briefly. One is when I first moved to Cardiff University, I did a piece of work for the Older Persons Commissioner in Wales, And they wanted a study on whistleblowing because there had been a lot of concerns about whistleblowing on their complaints line and in their policy work. And they wanted somebody to investigate it in relation to older people's care. So we went and basically we did a literature review on the topic. And then we decided to go out and talk to a range of people working with older people. And they could be in care homes, they could be in domiciliary care, they could be in day hospital settings. It was a whole mix of people, student nurses, qualified, healthcare assistants, and also importantly, some managers.
Mm.
And basically what we found from, I think we did about, I think it was over 50 interviews in total. And we asked people what they thought about whistleblowing and when would they think about ever doing that. The vast majority said that whistleblowing was quite a scary idea, that it was something that they would, if they had ever thought about it, they'd only really heard about it on the TV or in the radio or the newspaper. And it was usually to do with a big problem, big scandal, and it usually was quite a nasty situation. And that confirmed really what's in the literature about this issue. When we spoke to different kinds of practitioners, they might have slightly different insights into that. So the managers were interesting because they talked about trying to create a culture where they said they had an open door culture, where people could come and talk to them if they were worried. And it needn't be about life and death issues. It could be just about the way people were being got up in the morning and how they were being fed, or the kind of atmosphere that existed in the home. And there were a couple of memorable quotes from managers. One said that he talked about, there's a concept in the literature called normalization of deviance, which is where the abnormal slowly becomes normal. And he talked about in older people's care, how the way older people are treated can gradually change to become, to an outsider or a fresh pair of eyes, it might seem quite brutal at times or not very caring. And he said it's very important to get young people's or new nurses, new students' perspectives on their area. So he always tries to see them within the first couple of weeks and get a kind of feedback from them. And the other thing he said is that, there are other aspects, like he might go down into the unit and he might smell urine. And that's become normalized. And he said, well, in people's homes, you wouldn't expect that. So he says it. He doesn't whistleblow, but he says, there's a smell of urine here. We need to get rid of that. So those are just small examples from that study, which we published, and it confirmed the problematic nature of blowing the whistle.
Yes.
And we found that there were other strategies that people might use instead of that. So they might use humor. So one student nurse talked about how she might say to her colleague, when they were with a patient and the other student was talking about her weekend, and she might say, oh, the patient's not interested in hearing about your weekend, and refer to the patient. She said, so you try and change you're not blowing the whistle, but what you're saying to that person is, I don't think this is quite right.
Yes.
The way we're communicating.
Yeah.
There was another example of a healthcare assistant talking about how one of her colleagues was feeding a patient very fast one day. And she saw this and she worried about it. And she said to the colleague, said to the patient rather, oh, don't worry, she's going out tonight. She's in a bit of a hurry.
Yeah.
And she said, you get a look, but it's hit home.
Yeah.
So she hasn't raised a big concern. She hasn't blown the whistle. But what she's done is she's found her voice and has said something.
Yeah.
So that's the first study, and people might like to read a bit about that.
Yeah.
There's a lot more in there than I've just said. The second study is one that we're doing at the moment, which is a bigger piece of work, which is people will probably know about the Francis inquiry into the Mid-Staffordshire situation in 2010, 2011. And what that inquiry found was a culture that had sort of slipped into quite unacceptable ways of being. And people who saw this, especially in some of the emergency units and some of the more acute settings, thought this isn't right. This isn't how we should be. And one of them, Helen Allan, who became known as the main whistleblower for Mid-Staffordshire, she eventually wrote to the chief executive of the trust. She talked to the RCN. She refused to let things go. Now, as a result of that work, one of the recommendations that Robert Francis made was that this should never happen again. That's often said when these inquiries take place, as you know. But one of the things they recommended was the implementation of what were called freedom to speak up guardians. These are posts, paid posts, in NHS trusts in England. And they have been probably in place for about 2 years. So the government instructed trusts to appoint guardians, what are called local guardians. There's also a national guardian who sits in an office in London, and these local guardians report to this person. So there's been a system emerge. And our research is evaluating those roles. So we're doing case studies in about 6 different sites in cities and in rural areas, different NHS trusts. And we're talking to people at different levels in those trusts. And we are carrying out interviews so that we can find out, are those posts helping us to deal with concerns in a better way than existed before the Mid-Staffordshire events? So we're finishing that research at the end of this year, and it's been quite a lot of work. And the phase we're at the moment is we're now speaking to some what we've called national stakeholders, so people who have a stake in these roles. So I've been interviewing people from the RCN, the legal department there. I've been speaking yesterday, I did an interview with someone from NHS professionals. And what this study is highlighting is, and compared to the last one, which if you remember was very much about moments in practice where people raised concerns in a much more immediate way. What this study is showing is that these posts have been put in place and may or may not be the best way to manage staff concerns. So students from Middlesex, if they're going out on placement, there will be a local guardian who they can speak to. Now, the staff should know who that person is. In their induction or their orientation, they should be told who that person is. The guardians we've spoken to are dealing with a whole range of levels of issues, from complaints about off-duty up to really big issues about patient safety and staffing, bullying, harassment. So it's been a very interesting, and just those 2 studies are at different levels, if you like, and The second study we've yet to report on, but there will be papers coming out. But there's already various small pieces. We've done presentations, etc. And be very happy to tell you more about that once we know. But I suppose the main message is that whistleblowing as an act is quite an extreme thing to do. And most people who do it pay the price in some way. So it's problematic. And there are other ways to find your voice. And maybe the lesson from this is, as a student, you need to learn to find that voice and to use it wisely. And to get allies, to get people around you who share your values, and especially when you're in practice, if you're worried about something, talk to someone. Don't just think this is normal, because remember that thing about the abnormal can become normal. And so you need to remember what normal should be.
I think that's really helpful, Danny. Thank you.